All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Can you all hear me? Thumbs up if you can hear, please. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, perfect. Awesome. Awesome. So welcome. This is the Advanced Practice Seminar for graduating seniors in the Master Level Social Work Program. Yeah. How many more weeks do you want?
9 more Mondays after.
9 more Mondays after today, and they will be graduates. And so I am Dr. Kimberly Mays, licensed clinical social worker, assistant professor here at Florida Gulf Coast University. Thank you for joining us. The purpose of this opportunity is for us to be able to highlight various areas of social work practice that would give the students in this course the opportunity to see beyond what the traditional social work roles are. And so today we have Dr. Amelia Mahan, LCSW. She will introduce herself here shortly. She is going to be talking about eco-social work and really giving us the scope of understanding of what that looks like, potential job opportunities, some trends, and she will talk about her research that she has been able to publish last year around opportunities in eco-social work. And so this will be recorded, and so I believe I already started the recording. All right, Dr. Mahan, it is all you.
All right. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. I am thrilled to be here. Dr. Mays didn't mention, she and I went through a DSW program together. And so it's just always a delight to get to meet colleagues and folks we've met along the way. And I feel so privileged to be invited to come and speak with you all today. And congratulations, you're so close to the end. That's incredibly exciting. So my plan for today is I'm going to tell you about myself, a bit about my background, because I didn't start out doing eco-social work. And I think that's a common theme that you've probably heard from most of your guest speakers. I think some people have this idea of what they want to do and they stick to that, and that's fantastic. I think a lot of us, we have a lot of ideas and we're not sure how it's all going to fit together. And yet somehow we try to pull things together, and we find interesting niches that we fit into. And that's definitely been my experience in eco-social work. So to introduce myself, again, my name is Amelia Mahan. My pronouns are she and her. I'm white-bodied, cisgender, vegetarian, and child-free. I just always like to lead with sort of these key aspects of who I am. I'm originally from Georgia, but I spent my early childhood in Burkina Faso and West Africa. Then I was back in Georgia for middle school and high school. I went to the University of Georgia for my bachelor and master's of social work. As an adult, after graduating, I moved and lived and volunteered in Morocco in North Africa for a number of months, and then later had the opportunity to serve in Peace Corps in Malawi in Southeast Africa. I mention all of this just because I think I have a little bit of a global perspective that I wouldn't have had otherwise, but having had opportunities to live and you just kind of see different ways of being has definitely influenced me and influenced my interest in social work generally and eco-social work specifically. So I've been working as a social worker for the past 19 years, which is wild that so much time has passed. I've worked in a variety of roles, and I'll talk more about this as we go forward, but I've done everything from refugee resettlement to mental health to physical health to teaching. I've worked in nonprofits, for-profit, state government, and predominantly I've worked in rural communities and have a real passion for some of the specific needs to rural communities. Currently, I live in the desert of Southern California, right outside Joshua Tree National Park. My husband's a park ranger, and so I have a deep love of nature, and I've seen firsthand the impacts of the climate crisis, increasing storms and other things that I know you all have experienced there in Florida as well. As an aside, I actually used to vacation as a child down at Sanibel Island, so I'm real familiar with the Fort Myers area. So again, it's just a pleasure to be talking with you all. In January of 2024, so about a year ago, I completed my doctorate of social work with Simmons University, and my capstone sort of brought eco-social work to the forefront. It gave me an opportunity to really focus some of my passions and to see what I might be able to do with that. going forward. And so these passions are why I'm here talking to you right now. Currently, I'm an adjunct professor with 3 different universities. I do a little bit of consulting on the side. I also do volunteering with the national park because it literally is my backyard. And I just recently became involved with the Mojave Desert Land Trust that are doing some really interesting and exciting things around environmental work. And so I thought this is a good opportunity to see how I can get plugged in. So again, education, went to UGA for BSW and MSW. So there is a picture on one side of me about 20 years ago. And then last year, graduated with my DSW from Simmons University. And really, as I said, that allowed me to have that opportunity to explore how to combine personal passions for the environment, for nature, how to bring that into social work, which again, I will talk a lot more about. These pictures I chose mainly because I think I was a really cute kid, and a cute kid on a camel. I just find adorable the fact that I'm wearing my Atlanta Braves big hat and my little pink shoes, like it's just too much. But I list this here because even though I was a child, my growing up in Burkina Faso was instrumental to who I am today. Growing up as the child of missionaries was instrumental to who I am today. And so I really have built my career on this foundation of childhood and this value of family of service to others. And so that's why I show that there. So even when eco-social work principles weren't always evident in the moment, in my personal and professional experiences, my career has been steered towards eco-social work and towards teaching, which is what I really love doing. So again, spent my early childhood in Burkina Faso. It was the late 1980s. But I saw even then firsthand the effects of desertification. So where the Sahara Desert was little by little creeping down and continues to creep down and impact people's ability to grow food. And I've seen that worsen over the decades. I've still have some childhood friends that we talk periodically, and that's gotten worse, and has led to other problems, including water access and some just some troubles related to who controls the water and who controls the food, which unfortunately I think is something that we're going to be seeing worldwide more and more as we head into the future. But I promise it's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of really cool stuff too, so I'm not going to stick with the doom and gloom. Later, as a Peace Corps volunteer, I witnessed similar issues in Malawi, where extreme drought and extreme flooding really devastated farmers' livelihoods time and again. The other picture that I included, mainly because again, it's colorful and I really like it, was when I was volunteering in Peace Corps. And that is a girls group that I had the opportunity to work with and talk about girls empowerment, which is also a big part of the eco work, because women worldwide do a lot of they're the ones who are gathering the water. They're the ones who are doing a lot of the farming and everything else. And we know that the more educated girls can be, the better chance they have of being able to not just survive, but to thrive and support their families and support themselves. In the early 2000s, I had the opportunity to volunteer in Morocco, and that was my first introduction to working with migrants and refugees from across Africa. They left their homes for a lot of reasons. A lot of it was political and other things, but poverty and the lack of economic options was really foremost. And we know that poverty is made significantly worse by the worsening climate crisis. So it wasn't a common term in the early 2000s, but this idea of environmentally induced migrants or environmental migrants, environmental refugees, this is a term that's becoming more common, and it's people who have to move in response to immediate life-threatening events or because the environment has gotten so bad that they can't support themselves and their livelihoods. And so I got to see some of that in that early work in Morocco. And that is what some later research has led to, which I'll talk about. Dr. Mays mentioned, I've had a chance to do a little bit of research and work around working with migrants. So after graduating with my MSW, after working in Morocco for about 7 months, I then moved to North Carolina and worked in refugee resettlement. Then I veered into mental health, and this was a very surprising veer for me. It was a big zig or big zag. for me. When I was getting my bachelor's and my master's, I focused on macro practice. That was my main area of interest. I was like, no, we've got to change systems. That's where it's at. Well, very quickly, I had that realization that I think is very important is that, oh, to get those macro jobs, you kind of need that direct experience. It's critically important. If we're doing macro work, but we've never actually talked to people who are living experiences, we're just disconnected and we don't know what we're talking about. And so it's really important that we get that experience and then we can go and we know what the systems are doing and how we can change them. So I never thought I was going to go into mental health. I had no interest in being a therapist or a clinician or anything like that. But life happens, and so there was an opportunity to get into some community mental health work and to get my provisional license. And quite honestly, it was because it was a job and I needed a job, so that's what I did. But it's funny how things work out because that led to a real interest in mental health work. So from community mental health, I then transitioned to working at a state psychiatric hospital in rural North Carolina. Again, if I was in my master's program and you'd asked me if I was going to work at a psych hospital, I would have said, nope, no, thank you, not for me. But we do the things that we take those opportunities that present themselves, and I'm so glad that I did. It gave me just really important experience that has shaped the rest of my social work career. Um, I found that, and bringing the eco into this mental health piece, I noted even then, even though I still wasn't thinking of eco social work as a thing or an opportunity, whether I was providing mental health support to a troubled 18-year-old who was aging out of foster care, or I was working with an older woman who lived in the psychiatric hospital for over a decade, and we were doing some solution focused therapy. I didn't know that term ecotherapy, but I noted the benefits that came about when I could provide services in natural settings. So whether it's like, let's go for a walk around the park and we're going to talk about things. Or with this older woman, let's go sit outside. Let's just that experience of being in the sunshine and having greenery around you. Um, these little pieces of eco were there. So after working at the psych hospital, I finally had the macro chance, and I was excited about it because I felt like, okay, now I actually have some understanding of what people have experienced, what the really crucial critical needs are. So I took a role with North Carolina Medicaid and their behavioral health program, and that was my first foray into policy and shaping policy and the slow process of shaping policy. Um, but it led to other opportunities. So I then became the director of a statewide nonprofit and a behavioral health integration team. We were working in partnership with Medicaid, really trying to focus on supporting low income and marginalized North Carolinians and ensuring that they had access to mental health and behavioral health services, even in rural communities where maybe the only person they had access to was their primary care doctor. It was at that point, there was a big focus then, and there still is, on social determinants of health. And, these are the conditions in which people are born, grow, work, live, and age, and all these forces and systems that shape those conditions. Well, the physical environment is a huge part of that. And so recognizing that physical environment is critical as we're thinking about those social determinants of health. Whether someone has transportation to get to something, they have long distances between where they're going, right? Like that's a social determinant of health. If you're living in housing that is older, and perhaps is less ventilated, perhaps there's risk of mold and other things. Maybe it's not well insulated, so you're having to use heaters. There's a risk of contaminants and pollutants and higher rates of asthma. Like there's a huge connection there between the actual environment around us and our health. So I had a chance to kind of get into that when I was working in the big nonprofit. Later, I went to Peace Corps, as I mentioned, and had opportunities to partner with an environmental volunteer. Spoiler alert, he's my husband. So we had a chance to partner together, and we did many trainings and engaged with the community around how improving the soil and improving like the environment and how you're growing crops can also improve the quality of the food. And so it was like a nutrition of body and nutrition of land. It was very, very cool. And so we did some of that. And so I was like planting the seeds. And I know that's such a corny term to say as I'm talking about the environment, but truly planting the seeds of what I was going to do later. So I promise I'm almost done talking about all this stuff, but and getting into kind of the more nitty gritty of eco-social work. But I want to just make it so clear that there are so many twists and turns you can make in your career. And sometimes you don't see how it's going to connect. You don't see what you're learning in that moment. But when you look back, you're like, okay, that led to this, which led to this, which I just think makes life interesting and exciting. And is why I love social work, because we have such a variety of options. When we came back from Peace Corps, that's when we moved out to Southern California. My husband, that's how he got into the Park Service. And I worked for I was the director of a home health and hospice agency here, again, in a very rural community. So I have following dreams on my key milestones there because my husband was following the national park dream. And I was still trying to figure out what is the dream? Like, what is it that I'm going to be doing? What do I want to be doing? And so, again, in working for the home health and hospice agency in a rural community, I saw firsthand the challenges that folks were having. I mean, out here we have a lot of folks who still live off dirt roads. Access to power and water and cell service is still challenging. And so I got to see all of that firsthand, which also, got me thinking. When we had some really serious fires back in 2020, that was really eye-opening, because I realized if you're on home health, you're homebound. And so what do we do for our clients who can't leave? They can't get out of bed. But they might have to evacuate. How do we account for that? How do we look out for folks? And that's an environmental issue. On the same side, if any of you have pets, then yeah, I know that they are precious to you and they're part of your family. This gentleman in particular that I'm thinking about, when the fires were coming through, he had animals. And so he was like, even if he could move and evacuate, he didn't want to because he couldn't take his animals. And so these are things as social workers we have to be thinking about. Because it's going to impact us whether or not we think of ourselves as doing environmental work. So after that, kind of as COVID was not as intense, I said, all right, I know what the dream is now. I've got it. I want to go back to school. I want to get my DSW. I want to pursue teaching. And through that, like, how can I spread this word about all the things we can do in social work? And it was incredible. I had the opportunity to read and research things that I care about passionately, and got an opportunity to do that for school, which is even better, and kind of frame that. So that's kind of where I'm at. So I created a course that I'm marketing at the moment, trying to find places to be able to teach it. I was appointed to the Council on Social Work Education's Council on Environmental Justice and Human Rights. So I've had the opportunity to meet some of my eco-social work heroes. It's really fun when you start reading lots and lots of articles, and then you get to meet the people who wrote the articles. Big nerd alert, it's very exciting when that happens. So I've had a chance to co-author a paper on climate impacts and to migration, specifically for Indigenous communities out of South America, which is, I'm going to talk more about what the climate is doing to marginalized groups, and kind of what that looks like. And I've got a few other proposals and whatnot in the works. So that's, trying to figure out what are the next steps. That is a big part of it. But that's kind of what got me to this point. So I'm finally going to change slides, because you're probably thinking, my God, that was a long time to talk with that one slide. But here we go, moving on. So thinking about specific challenges to the work that I've done thus far. So what I've found, I've had the experience of often being the only social worker at the agency, which can be really exciting. But it can also be really challenging because people don't know what we do. And so I so appreciate that Dr. Mays has put together this panel, this lecture series, because we do so many things and people are very limited in thinking about what does social work mean. And so I found that's been a struggle of trying to educate people on what is the role of social workers. Specifically in healthcare settings, I have had to deal with that hierarchy of doctors thinking I'm the secretary or the administrative assistant. Typically white male doctors, let's be real, who I'm talking about here. And nurses, thinking nurses know everything and social workers don't know much. We're just good at, getting people transportation vouchers, that kind of thing, without really recognizing all the things that we bring to the table. I've also had to deal with folks not recognizing that connection between mental health and physical health. And so just sort of dumping clients on us, sort of thinking we'll just take everybody. And again, not that we have value, but they just don't want to deal with it. They're just going to send us their challenging folks. I've certainly had to deal with high stress and low paying jobs. That was also a reason to pursue, and I'm so proud of you all for pursuing your MSWs, BSW, MSW, keep going, pursue those dreams, so that you get paid what you're worth and you know your own value. It's just so important. I've certainly had to deal with areas that are very low resourced. It's really hard when you have someone sitting in front of you, either individually or community in front of you, and there are not the resources that people need. And so that's where we bring in a lot of social work creativity, right? And we forge partnerships. I'm going to talk a lot more about partnerships in a minute. I've had the challenge with other social workers of being someone who is interested in macro and like the community and beyond, in a field that can sometimes feel very micro and clinically focused. I think there's a place for all of us, but having those conversations and figuring out what that place is and still being valued even within our own profession has been challenging sometimes. So lots of challenges I don't think are unique to doing eco-social work. I think it's unique. It's just part of social work. So you definitely are going to face challenges, but find your people and find your niche, and it's amazing what you can overcome. So I know a minute ago I mentioned, doctors not recognizing the value of social workers. I've also worked with plenty of medical folks, doctors, pharmacists, others who really, truly value social work. So you just got to find those people, educate where you can, move on where you can't, and find people to help. Oops. So there's lots and lots of environmental intersections with social work. And I'm going to talk more about this momentarily, but one of our big frameworks in social work is this idea of person and environment. And I think often it's been thought of as the social environment, right? Which is really important. But I challenge you to think broader than that. We need to consider the physical environment in which people are living, because the environment impacts our health, right? In so many ways, our physical health, our mental health, all of it. We all need air to breathe. We all need water to drink and to bathe and to wash clothes, to wash food. We need healthy food to eat. We need green, and I say or natural spaces because I live in a desert. It's not very green, but we need natural spaces to really restore our souls. Whether that's having a house plant or many house plants in your house, or it's having a little backyard garden, or it's having the local park that you go to. We all need that. And so often we live in these very built up environments, and we can forget that we're a part of nature, right? Because we're in buildings all the time. But we all need access to that part of us. Nature is a part of us, and so we need access to that. We need to not be exposed to diseases that are spread within the environment. We know that access to resources is not something that's equitably distributed, either around the country or even in the same community. Groups who have been marginalized are impacted most by environmental injustices. So I urge you in your own communities to think about, where is industry located? Where are the landfills located? Where are the polluting industries located? Where are the highways? This was something that I've thought a lot about. When you think about who lives near the highway, often it's multifamily apartment buildings that are along the highway. And we know that just the pollutants coming out of cars, if you breathe that in, day out, there are higher rates of asthma. And so there's so many things that we can sort of, we see those connections.
And wait just a minute. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I was saying this would be.
No problem. Am I good to go? Okay, awesome. Again, thinking about housing where there's lead paint, where there's mold, when we think about the destruction of sacred spaces for oil and for fracking, these are just a few things that come up. And when we think about who we serve as social workers and kind of what our role is, and think about our code of ethics around value and respect for all people and self-determination. Like, these environmental issues are things that impact our people, right? They impact us directly, and they impact the folks that we're serving. Think about, where those food deserts are, where folks don't have a grocery store near them, where they can get healthy food. Think about where water is more likely to be contaminated. And I feel like now this has been a while, which is wild because this was a very fresh example at one point, but in Flint, Michigan, with the contamination of water, and that continues to be an issue and a situation. Um, that's a place where the folks that we're serving, right, they're impacted by these things. So as social workers, I would say we have a moral obligation to pay attention to the environment and what's happening. Those who have wealth and privilege are typically not going to have these polluting industries in their own neighborhoods, right, or in their own communities, even when they benefit from those things. It's folks who feel like they have less of a voice, who've been blocked from systems of decision making, who faced institutional racism and so forth. These are the folks who end up having these new dumping sites placed. So just keep all of that in mind when you're thinking about where you could plug in, where there are these environmental intersections in the work that you yourself want to do. And I'm going to talk more about what some of those roles can be. Sometimes you actually are called an eco-social worker. Sometimes you're doing something else, but you're actually doing eco-social work. There's lots of possibilities. Some key terms that I think are important to understand. So environmentalism is how I got into being interested in the environment. So let's protect nature, right? Let's preserve it. Let's protect wilderness and all of that, which on the surface sounds nice and is important, but not at the, we can't do those things at the expense of historically marginalized folks. We can't do this at the expense of taking land that does not belong to us to preserve it, or designating something wilderness where people, they live and they work and everything else. So environmentalism as a whole has been very white and very privileged. So this move towards environmental justice really highlights those intersections where environmental issues that cause harm to marginalized communities or keep them from thriving, where that ties into human rights and social justice and all of that. Robert Bullard in the late 80s, he proposed this term environmental racism, which is something that's very, very clear and very real today. It came out of Warren County, North Carolina, where there was this desire to dump all these PCBs, just dump them everywhere, and it was really polluting the community. And there was this recognition that your identity actually impacts that your social identity, your social location has more to say with how you're going to be impacted by environmental issues than lots of other things. Like, it was just a really interesting thing. And so this report came out and he coined that term, environmental racism. Ecological justice takes things one step further. It's that recognition of what I was saying before, of where we are not above nature, but we're a part of nature, right? So it focuses on that interconnectedness between humans and the rest of the natural world. And then eco-social work brings it all together. And you'll also hear it called green social work, and you'll hear environmental social work. But eco-social work to me is the term that really captures the breadth of what's going on. So it recognizes that human well-being is linked to the planet's well-being. Our physical environment has a major impact on communities, whether that's natural or the built environment. And there's so much we can build on. We have so many skills and strengths in social work that really have us at the cusp of being able to do so much in this world. So there's a lot of opportunities for some creative collaboration. So just a quick bit of history in case you're thinking, well, interesting that social work just now is paying attention to environmental issues. Not so. Actually, since the beginning of sort of the inception of even the term social work, working with environmental issues has been a part of things. So there's these four waves, and honestly, the fourth wave, the mid 1990s to present, I'm like, my gosh, a lot has happened since the mid 1990s. I think we're really in a fifth wave at this point. That seems like a real broad stretch. But sort of this first wave was the late 1800s when social work pioneers like Jane Addams recognized the health effects of the environment. So there were big pushes around sanitation and recognizing crowded cities. And there was also, that's when the SPCA came about, protecting animals. It's wild to me, we protected, there's a recognition that we don't want to be cruel to animals before there's a recognition that we don't want to be cruel to children. Just wild. Like, I'm glad we need both, right? But that was all happening in those late 1800s. The second wave in the mid 1900s, at this point, social work actually kind of distanced itself from the environment. It was more focused on psychotherapeutic methods, but there's a lot of stuff happening in the greater country. So obviously, civil rights were huge, and that's where there were so many connections between civil rights and environmental justice because they do go hand in hand. There were people started questioning, wait, we can't just keep consuming things and throwing things away. Like we can't do that indefinitely, right? The stuff that we throw away goes somewhere. And then that third wave, this is when the situation in Warren County came to be. And so that was, again, the coining of this environmental justice, environmental racism. The governor of North Carolina wanted to build a landfill in Warren County, and people were really fighting it. They said, this is polluting our roads, it's polluting our fields, it's polluting everything. We can't have this. And so people came together and fought, and they protested, and they fought for multiple years. And it was that first real visual, I'm sure it was happening in other places before this, but where there's a real connection between environmentalists working with civil rights folks, building off the community, and working with the community to fight the injustice. That's also when the first environmental justice report was released. That's when the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit happened, and they issued these principles of environmental justice. That's in the early 1990s. So this kind of falls between the third and fourth wave. That's when President Clinton did an executive order that said we have to have federal guidelines that respond to environmental justice issues. We have to include people if there are going to be environmental things that are happening. Like, we can't, nothing about us without us, right? It's that same concept. And then this fourth wave explores more that intersection of our human social identity, our lived experience, our access to the benefits and the burdens of nature. So a lot of sustainability activism is kind of what's happening right now. So currently, social workers are still super involved. If you look at any of our sort of national and international entities, they've put out information about environmental justice and about climate change specifically. So if you look at the NASW, environmental justice is one of their social justice priorities. They've also joined with other groups to form a social climate leadership group, specifically looking at the mental health needs of individuals and communities facing climate issues. The American Academy of Social Workers and Social Welfare released the Grand Challenges for Social Work, and they have an entire Grand Challenge just for environmental work. It's creating social responses to a changing environment. So it's been really cool to see like renewed energy and excitement in the research field around this. The International Federation of Social Workers, they're doing so much out there. And I will say US, and I'm from the US, right? But US based social workers, we're a little slow to get on board. Internationally, people have been doing this kind of work for years and years, because again, they're being hit first and worst by changing climate issues. And so the International Federation of Social Workers, if you're interested in this, go explore all of the great information that they have there. And then the Council on Social Work Education, they have a curricular guide focused on this issue. They also have the Council of Environmental Justice and Human Rights that I'm a part of. There's a lot happening. Kind of, how do we get this work into social work education? Oops. Sorry, I keep pressing the wrong thing and think I'm changing my slides. So my current focus is education, teaching, having opportunities to speak to groups whenever possible. I I teach remotely. And so this is not a picture of my setup. I wish it was, though. It looks so lovely and so neat. But that's my focus, is any opportunity to talk to folks about how can we get involved in environmental work and connect. It's just such a natural connection. So the skills I have listed there, those are skills that I feel like I have, but they're also social work skills that you've either developed or in the process of developing. So as social workers, we have this ability, I love this term, boundary spanning, this ability to connect disparate groups of people, to sort of see that bigger picture, to make those connections, to pull people together. I know one thing that I'm very good at, and it served me well working in healthcare, and really in every job that I've had, is being able to translate information from like sort of up here to like understandable language, and vice versa, to be able to take what folks on the ground are dealing with and translate that back up to leadership in a way that they're going to hear. So that ability is a huge skill to have. Again, systems thinking, we are all so interconnected. And when we stop remembering that, is when things break down. And so we have to think about, okay, so I'm working on this piece. How does that connect to what my friend is doing, who's not even a social worker? Oh, wow, let's connect, let's join. So many of the micro skills that you've learned as social workers, when it comes to active listening and motivational interviewing and understanding human behavior, these are all skills that go into relationship building. These are all skills that will serve you well doing environmental work. Being able to facilitate, being able to recognize that the structural inequities and power differentials, right? Like, we have to recognize that things are not the way they should be. And so how do we get plugged in and to work on that, right? So if we have to cultivate relationships that are built on compassion and mutual interest. Like, that's how we're gonna attack these existing power imbalances, and we're gonna try to right them and make them better. So lots and lots of ways that you can use your skills to be involved. So trends, eco-social work can be a standalone job. It can also be added across really, truly all practice levels and populations. And so I urge you, I want to hear from people afterwards. If this is something you're interested in, I could talk about it all day. But I urge you to come up with a practice level or a population and see if we can find a way that, let's see if we can come up with something where environmental work doesn't connect. And I challenge you, I don't think it's possible. Because I just think there are so many connections. And so a lot of folks who are in this realm doing this work, most of them are doing social work, and they're adding on the eco piece to everything that they do. And I'll give you some specific examples of how you can do that, even from individual therapeutic practice and beyond, where you can pull in environment. Technology is really critical. So when you think about environmental work, whether you think about cleaning up polluted sites, whether you think about carbon capture efforts to try to bring the overall planet's temperature down, these are all exciting. There are so many technological advances happening. When you think about how to purify seawater to make it drinkable, I mean, there's so many places. Technological solutions without that human element and without that justice focus, they're not enough on their own. And so there's a real place for social workers to push themselves forward, to be at that table, to make sure that we're considering the justice impacts to people. Prime example, there's been a push to move towards electric vehicles, and that's great. But the only people who can afford electric vehicles right now are people who have money. And so if you're poor in California, for instance, there's this idea of adding a gas tax to try to encourage people to move away from gas-powered vehicles. On the surface, the environmental part of me is like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Like, we need to move away from fossil fuels. But on the equity side, I'm like, great, but so we're going to add an extra tax to people who already, like, if they, like, I think of myself, I can't afford an electric vehicle right now. And so you're going to overburden people who are already struggling. There are a lot of pushes, again, thinking about California, but I know across the country, to, add in solar panels and to move more towards that technology, which is great. Homeowners are the ones who can get discounts and rebates and other things to add solar panels and to do other things to improve their housing, to better insulation, all of that. If you rent, then you're not getting those benefits. So even that is an equity issue. And so there's just so many places where it all sounds good, and we need to think about, okay, what is the impact going to be? What are the unforeseen consequences, and how can we make sure that justice and equity is at the center of what's going on? So areas of practice, if you were interested in doing individual therapy, individual family group therapy, clinical practice, there is a whole area right now of practice that is focused on eco-anxiety. If you talk to anyone, I think a lot of us feel eco-anxiety, especially if you've been in areas that have been hit by storms and other things. I mean, I'm thinking about the hurricanes. Y'all have faced those in recent memory. And they can be devastating, and it's scary to think, is it just going to keep getting worse? Like, what do we do? How do we prepare? So there's a lot of eco-anxiety out there, and a lot of kind of hopelessness around this. As therapists, this is something you can specialize in, and you can talk with people about how to mitigate that. You know, what are small actions people can do? Because we know taking action makes us all feel better, right? It helps with anxiety, it helps with depression, but also just recognizing the anxieties that people are feeling. So that's a whole area. There's also just ecotherapy, which can mean a lot of different things, but that's an area of specialized practice too, where part of that is nature as intervention. So how can you bring nature into your therapeutic spaces? How can you take people out into nature in a safe way? And that can include animal-assisted therapy. Because again, our furry friends, right? Like, they're a part of nature and they mean so much to us. I should have thrown up a picture of my two little dogs because I love them so much. And they're not therapy dogs, but they provide therapy to me. So those are areas specifically in the clinical realm that you could incorporate. Other things that you can do, even if you're like, I'm just trying to get started. I'm getting used to being a clinician. As you're doing intakes, you can ask about the natural and built environment. We ask about everything, right? Like, if you've done a biopsychosocial spiritual assessment, they're immense. It's a lot of things that we're asking about. Well, why don't we ask about their environment, right? How old is their house? Do they have any green space near them? What's the heating and cooling situation? Like, these are things that we know they impact people's health, they impact people's mental health. So let's ask about them. Let's talk about, what does that look like? And recognizing that is an aspect, that's the context around people that's influencing how they are. Also, just think about those environmental determinants of health. Again, it just goes beyond that. Like, again, where do you live? And what does that environment look like? And, how are you, are there infrastructure things that could be done to help to mitigate, to prepare for hotter summers and colder winters and all of that? Getting connected in those areas can be really huge. So that gets to that housing. If you're interested in working in housing, access to housing, affordability of housing, we also do need to be thinking about infrastructure and how can we help folks to shore up their existing housing in a way that's going to prepare them for more ecological changes that are coming. Food security, this can it's huge, right? Access to quality food, working with farm workers and farm worker rights. These are all issues that social workers are involved in. Again, health equity, I've talked about a good bit. Trauma-informed disaster response, unfortunately, we're going to continue to see natural disasters, and we always have. They're going to continue to get worse. And so thinking about, if you're a trauma-informed practitioner, how can you get plugged in? Recently, you all know, in Los Angeles, some horrific, unprecedented wildfires swept through. And so a lot of social workers and other clinicians stepped up and have been offering pro bono, trauma-informed counseling and disaster response. I do think, as social workers, we need to also think about how we can help on the preventative side, right? And that's why I get excited about, like, the infrastructure changes. There's this excellent quote of, if prevention guards against the crises of the future, it's nonetheless motivated by the urgency of now. right? Like we need to be working towards prevention while dealing with existing issues. I think as a whole, as a profession, we often wait until things have gotten really bad. That's when people come to us. But how can we be a little more proactive in our thinking around that? If you work with immigrants and refugees, as I mentioned earlier, there's so much more and more we're going to see people moving because their existing spaces, their homes are no longer livable. And you can see this even you see it internationally, you see it nationally as well, as people have to move because they don't have the funds to rebuild. They don't have the funds to come back and start over. Time and again, we see this, and so we're going to see people moving and shifting. And so, as social workers, we need to think about how can we prepare for that. There's so many opportunities in community development to step up and show up, and again, just be a voice. You know, use your voices for good. One exciting area of community development is around community gardens. That's kind of a big push, and that also gets into the food security aspect. So you got the food security, you're growing food, how amazing. And you're also working in nature, right? Like you're putting your hands in the dirt. Like that's also amazing, and is good for all of us. So many opportunities for partnerships. We need to get creative. I think social workers as a whole are comfortable with working in education, working in healthcare systems, but we need to think beyond that. How do we get involved in environmental organizations, city planning, agriculture, technology, media, you know, wherever there are opportunities to bring our values. And again, I just lean on that, our social justice values to that table. So this quote that I have here gets to what I was saying earlier about the need to cultivate these relationships built on compassion and mutual interest, right? Like that has to be a part of the work that we're doing as we're working in pretty dysfunctional systems. So, you know, again, we can work with organizations to improve infrastructure. We can work with organizations to plant trees. We can work with organizations who are doing community planning and city planning and think about, okay, now if we plant trees, if we create green spaces, how do we avoid gentrification from happening? How do we make sure that the people who live here are involved in this work and it's something that they want and they can continue to live here? Because that we see that happen too. Because we all like green spaces, right? So it's like, oh, this is a cheaper area I can move into now that it looks pretty, and people who historically live there get pushed out. And so again, that's where, again, as social workers, I keep saying again, because it's like, I can't stress it enough. You know, there's so many places where we can speak up and step up. So my career advice for you, because you might be thinking, good God, this is so much information. My best advice for you is to stay curious and ask questions, network, look for connections between people and ideas, be creative in that, right? Think about places where this doesn't specifically say social worker, but as I'm reading the skill set, this is what I do, right? So know your value, own your skills. Social work skills are highly transferable. They're people skills, right? So if you're working individually, if you're working at the community level, if you're working at the policy level, we got to have some dang good people skills, right? And advocacy skills. Like these are things we can do. And so we need to show up where we're not expected and kind of really, I used to play basketball and I'd throw some elbows, right? So like throw some bows and get at that table and say, hey, hold on. You're not thinking about folks. You're not thinking about this. Um, Keep learning. I know you're about to graduate and you probably think I never want to learn another thing in my whole life. I promise that feeling will pass. Like give yourself a break. That feeling will pass, but keep learning and keep pursuing things that interest you. You never know how they're going to connect back to the work that you can do, right? Like what we do for fun, what we do for work don't have to be separate. Like look for creative ways to merge those. Find your people. I'm going to have some slides. I'm just going to show them real quick, and I'm going to make sure that Dr. Mays has this presentation so you can access them too. There are so many cool people you can follow and see what they're up to and just be inspired on a daily basis. And then locally, get involved with your local community. I'm so excited about my new found volunteering with the Mojave Desert Land Trust. One of the things they do, it's so basic, but it makes me really happy. They have a seed bank where they're preserving all of these native seeds. And so one of the volunteering things is to come in and clean seeds for like 4 hours. Such a nerdy thing, but I'm so excited about it because I'm just going to get to sit there and do these little tiny things. They also have a lot of educational events and other things. So I'm going to use my social work skills. But honestly, like there's stuff happening in every community. And so figure out who's doing what. And don't be afraid of the science. I think some people are hesitant to step into environmental work because they feel overwhelmed. Um, there are so many trainings out there, and you don't have to know everything. That is one skill that I've really leaned on is I don't have to know everything. I just need to know how to connect to people who do know things that I don't know, right? Like they serve as that connector. And that's such a value add. So I've got some people that I think are great people to follow. Some of them are social workers, some of them are not. Catherine Hayhoe, I want to highlight. She is Canadian. She has done so many videos and so many podcasts, and she writes. She has a newsletter strictly about how to talk about climate with everyone. And so she's just fantastic. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, she has a fantastic book and a podcast series that are centered around what if we get things right. So if you want a little bit of hope and you want to be inspired and excited, she is, I believe, an oceanographer by training, but really cool. Karen Costa is doing so much in the educational space. She's like every course is a climate course. And so she's a really cool one to follow. Jennifer Silverstein works at the intersection of climate justice and early childhood mental health because she said kids are scared, right? They see this stuff and they're scared. So that's a really niche kind of thing to plug into. Um, Mason, Krings, Forbes, Powers, Chuck Sierra, those are all social workers who have written some great stuff. And so they're kind of my eco social work heroes. There are so many others. I could not list everybody. Grace Anderson is a writer and a world builder who curates at the intersection of queerness, resource mobilization, climate, environmental justice, and Black dignity and imagination. Like she's a rock star. Christy Drutman has the Green Jobs Board if you're looking specifically for, okay, what are jobs that are not social work? But again, any job could be a social work job. And so how to get plugged in. So those are people to follow. There's also incredible websites to check out. There's a Facebook group, Ecologically Conscious Social Work. The Institute of Social Work and Ecological Justice do trainings. They have all sorts of stuff going on. And then I've got a whole list of other ones that I think are, it really just shows that this work is for all of us, right? And there's ways to get plugged in. At the very bottom, I listed the Environmental Working Group and Ethical Consumer. If you're just thinking about in your own life, changes that you can make that feel better and are more sustainable, those are two great groups to check out as well. There's podcasts and videos. I listed at the top there specific podcast episodes that I highly recommend. And then there's other podcasts like A Matter of Degrees and What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures. Those are ongoing podcasts to check out. And then there's some great video series as well. And then books, there's two books right now that are sort of key social work books. The Eco-Social Work, Environmental Practice and Advocacy. If there's anybody participating today who is a licensed clinician, this is a book that's available through NASW Press. If you read it and you do something at the end, you can actually get, I think, 6.5 CEUs for doing that. So I just think that's always exciting. And then Environmental Justice, the Social Work Practice. The International Federation of Social Workers has this 3-volume series, that social work promoting community and environmental sustainability. They're fantastic. Like it's mostly for educators, but anybody could get into it. It's just really exciting stuff. So I love this old saying, you should sit in nature for 20 minutes every day. Unless you're too busy, then you should sit for an hour, which I think is so great. I don't know about y'all. I am stressed and overwhelmed, and it is hard to know what to focus on these days. This saying, this idea is important, right? We need to set aside time to be connected to the world around us, and in that way, I think connect back to ourselves. So that was a whirlwind, a ton of information I just dumped on you. I would love to see what questions you have. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so maybe I can actually see some of you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Mahan. That was really good. You should have put our interview with Mark on the podcast page.
It's true, I should have.
Yes, you should have. We did a podcast talk with her husband, and we interviewed him and got some really, you should have, I just thought about that. But it's okay, we appreciate you so much. This was really good information, and so I am going to open up the floor for questions. If anyone in the Zoom or in the classroom has any questions. We have some students that are interested in animal assisted therapy, and so when they saw, you know, your slide, they were really, really happy. But you have a question?
It's
Yay.
less of a question and more of, I am just so floored. I loved absolutely everything that you had to say in this presentation. And I so appreciated just the broadband that you kind of covered with it. And it was just really exciting to hear parts of your story too, like with your Peace Corps and everything else. I have so many notes and I'm gonna take time to process, but just thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Honestly, I could talk about this stuff all day, every day. It makes me very happy. And please reach out. Like, I know my email was included in my LinkedIn, was included on the first slide. Again, I'll share them with Dr. Mays, but please don't hesitate to reach out if you want to just noodle on this stuff. I'm all in.
Listen, I already started typing my LinkedIn message, I just haven't.
Fantastic.
One of their assignments so far is to make sure that they have a LinkedIn page to get networking.
Good.
So I've already told them to, yes, to make sure that they connect with the guest lecturer, so you'll get some, yes.
I just also want to say thank you. I feel the same as Hannah. I feel like I went on a whole other life experience and like a whole journey. And I think it's awesome that you shared how you don't have to start out doing one thing and stick to it. That's what a lot of us have talked about in presentations, classes with Dr. Mays. And I think that's kind of where I am in like different intersections and trying to figure out, okay, like what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? Well, like it's okay. I can just do like things here, like it will just kind of ebb and flow. And I love how you talk about the presence of incorporating the environment into practice, but also the ethics of, okay, what are we doing to help the environment itself? So I think that's really awesome. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
I want to know what the leggings from Machu Picchu were.
Yeah.
Oh, so I told you that I did share your article and your research, so they want to know about South America and your article.
Sure. So it wasn't Machu Picchu specifically. Sorry. Yeah. So I had the opportunity, it was actually one of our DSW professors wanted to write an article just about the impacts of the shifting climate on immigrants. And she is from South America, and so that was kind of her area of interest. And I said, well, I've never been to South America. Really, it's high on the list. Lots of places I want to go, including Machu Picchu. But I haven't been, but I was like, but I can speak to the climate aspect. And so I had the opportunity to work with her and several other folks and did kind of a deep dive. And we ended up focusing specifically on indigenous communities because there's some indigenous communities tend to live in these sort of eco hotspots. When you think about the Amazon rainforest, when you think about glaciers in Peru and Argentina, like these glaciers that are not like ice caps. It's really interesting, you know, like these high altitude mountain glaciers in these areas and almost desert areas. And then also some of the aspects of Colombia close to the Caribbean Ocean, like just some really changing things that are happening, and indigenous groups are being harmed significantly in these areas. And so we're going to see more immigration, both internally within countries and then also to other countries. And so it was really exciting. I hope it was the start of something else. Like we've been talking about where do we want to go from here. But Dr. Franco is the professor's name. She had some, you know, real life examples she was able to bring in from work that she's done with some of these indigenous folks moving on. And yeah, we specifically focused, you know, on a few communities within South America, but you could take that and you could talk about communities within Africa, communities within Asia. I mean, communities within our own country, right? Like it's all, the principles are the same. So yeah, I can, Dr. Mays, I can share with you the link because the article is open access. And so if anybody wants to read it, that's, you know, I'd love to for you too.
Awesome, awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Anyone else? Anyone in the group chat? All right, and so I appreciate you again so much, and I thank you for taking the time to, really give us a great overview of what eco-social work is. And I wanted to get some feedback. And so those of you who are in the Zoom, if you can please capture the QR code on the screen and give Dr. Mahan some feedback on today's lecture, as well as the students in the room. You can use the link that is provided. If the QR code isn't coming up for you, you can type that link in with the code, and you can provide your feedback as well. Again, Dr. Mahan, we really appreciate you. I thank you so much. I know that when it comes to eco-social work, it is so broad. There's so much that we can do. And you said something, and we actually talked about this just before you came on, which was social work jobs are typically not labeled as social work jobs, right? A student actually
Yes.
brought up a job description, but the requirement was for an RN, but she was like, this is social work, this is what social work is doing. So we've talked about job opportunities not necessarily having the social work job title, and so sometimes it's good to kind of reverse engineer how you are going to do a job search or get into a certain industry based on
Absolutely.
what you desire versus the title. And so thank you for affirming some of the things that we've talked about in here. And I'll make sure that I get the slides from you, but also this has been recorded, so I'll send that to you as well.
Perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for the opportunity. Like I wish I could physically be there so I could see you all. But any chance to talk to folks, because it's the possibilities are endless, which can be overwhelming, right? But it's just, let's just like figure out what piece is your piece.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
And good luck as y'all get ready to graduate. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.